This project was made possible by a grant approved by the Americana Corner Preserving America Grant Program. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations do not necessarily represent those of the Americana Corner Preserving America Grant Program. Americana Corner was founded by Tom Hand in 2020 as an online resource to help others rediscover America's incredible founding and first century of expansion. The Americana Corner Grant Program assists organizations to tell the story of our nation's wonderful past and rekindle a love for American history in all its splendor. This video is intended for children in grades 3 through 5. However, it is suggested that adults preview the video in determining suitability for use with children. This video features the perspective of a non-native settler on the Virginia frontier during the time period of the American Revolutionary War. It is not intended to serve as a sole representation of all people of that era, nor is it intended to represent any other perspective from that time. There is mention and portrayal of death, and mention of violence and portrayal of violent action included. Note, no animals were harmed or killed for the purpose of this video. The Continental soldiers and the men who fought as members of their local militia carried their own equipment. For the men garrisoned at Fort Randolph, much of the equipment used was not issued by the Army, but provided by the men themselves. Items carried by Fort Randolph men included items used for protection and for survival on the frontier, so they were already familiar with these items because they used them in their everyday lives. The typical Fort Randolph soldier might carry a haversack filled with basic supplies such as food items like dried meat and sea biscuits, which would not spoil easily, a striker and flint for making fires, for cooking, and for staying warm, extra clothing such as a pair of socks and maybe an additional shirt, utensils and a bowl for eating, a cup for drinking, and oil for his firearms. Personal comfort items, such as a pipe for some tobacco, or perhaps a locket of hair from a loved one they were carrying. On his person, he would carry his hawk, his knives, and his small arms. Some soldiers would carry large and small arms to defend themselves and their fellow soldiers. Plus, some of the items needed for his arms, such as his cartridge box and a powder horn filled with powder. He would also carry his own bedroll, which he would need for sleeping, and his canteen for carrying something to drink. Like other American Revolutionary soldiers, the most important piece of equipment carried by a man garrisoned at Fort Randolph was his firearm. At the beginning of the American Revolution, most soldiers provided their own firearms or used ones provided by their local militia. Although rifles were more accurate, the most important and most well-known weapon during the American Revolution was the musket. The Brown Bess musket weighed about 10.5 pounds and was almost 5 feet long. It fired a 1-ounce lead ball and could be fitted with a bayonet. The bayonet allowed the musket to be used as a spear in close combat. Loading and firing a musket took multiple steps. First, to load the musket, a cartridge has to be removed from the cartridge box. The pan is then opened and primed with a little powder that is carefully measured out. The pan is then closed, and the rest of the powder is poured down the barrel. Then, finally, the ramrod pushes everything tightly together. When loading real ammunition, the ramrod would be used to push the ball and patch into the barrel. To fire the musket after it is loaded, it must be cocked and then the trigger pulled. A musket had to be loaded correctly to fire properly. Dry powder was essential in making sure the musket fired, so the men had to be careful and keep the powder dry at all times. Well-trained troops could load their muskets quickly and efficiently, and many legendary frontiersmen were even said to be able to load their muskets while in a dead run. Although in the early years of the American Revolution, men, like those at Fort Randolph, had to provide their own equipment, it gave them an advantage. This was because they were using equipment that they already used in their everyday lives, so they were very familiar with it and well skilled in its use.